The fluorescent lights of the public library hummed a monotonous tune, a sound so familiar to Owen it was like a second heartbeat. He leaned over the small table, his finger tracing a line in Pippa's math textbook. "See. You just have to carry the one," he whispered, his voice a low, patient rumble. Pippa, his 7-year-old daughter, scrunched her nose, her pigtails bobbing. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, a perfect miniature of his own when he was lost in thought. A worn patch on the elbow of his brown sweater brushed against her tiny backpack, a faded pink relic covered in unicorn stickers. It was their ritual, this quiet hour after school among the silent shelves, a pocket of peace in their whirlwind life. Suddenly, a frantic energy cut through the stillness. A girl, maybe 16, with a designer coat hanging precariously off her shoulders and eyes wide with a terror that didn't belong in a library, rushed toward them. She stopped at their table, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her gaze locked onto Owen, a man she'd never met, a complete stranger. Before he could ask if she was okay, her hand, cold and trembling, shot out and gripped his arm. The fabric of his sweater bunched under her fingers. "Please," she choked out, tears welling and spilling down her pale cheeks. "You have to help me. My mom, she's dying." Owen's heart gave a painful lurch. He looked from the desperate girl to his own daughter, whose eyes were now wide with alarm. He gently placed a hand over the girl's. "Okay, slow down. What's wrong?" The girl's plea shattered the library's hush, a desperate, unbelievable whisper. "Please, will you marry her?" The question hung in the air, so absurd it felt like a dream. Owen stared at the girl, whose name he learned was Clara, his mind struggling to connect her words to reality. Marry her mother. A dying woman he'd never met. He was a part-time librarian, a man whose greatest assets were his patience and a bottomless love for his daughter. His life was a careful ledger of bills paid and small joys savored. This felt like a page torn from a different, more chaotic book entirely. Clara, sensing his disbelief, pulled him toward a secluded alcove between towering shelves of history books. Pippa trailed behind, her small hand clutching the hem of Owen's jeans. "I know it sounds crazy," Clara began, her voice still shaking. "My mother, her name is Isabel. And my grandfather, Frederick Blackwood, he's difficult." That was an understatement. As Clara explained, a story of cold, corporate cruelty unfolded. Isabel had spent her life building the Blackwood Foundation, a philanthropic endeavor that supported struggling artists and community programs, turning her father's bloodless money into something beautiful. But Frederick despised it, seeing it as a waste. With both of them facing grave health crises, Isabel with a rare, aggressive illness and Frederick with a failing heart, he had enacted a final, cruel act of control. A clause in his will stated that for Isabel to inherit and secure the foundation's future, she must be in a stable, loving marriage upon his death. If not, the foundation, her life's work, would be dissolved and absorbed back into his soulless corporate empire. "He wants to erase her legacy," Clara wept. "She's poured everything into it. It's the only thing keeping her fighting." "Why you?" I've seen you in here with your daughter. The way you look at her. You seem kind. Safe." Owen looked down at Pippa, who was now quietly stroking his hand, her way of offering comfort. He was just a man trying to raise his child right. A kind face in a library. And now he was being asked to play a role in a billionaire's tragic endgame. Owen found Isabel not in a palatial suite, but in a stark white room on the oncology ward of a downtown hospital. The only color came from a vase of wilting flowers on the windowsill and the faint blue of the veins on her translucent skin. She was beautiful, even in her fragility, with sharp, intelligent eyes that held no trace of self-pity, only a guarded exhaustion. A steel spine was evident even as she lay propped against the pillows. Clara made the quiet introduction and then slipped out, leaving an almost unbearable silence in her wake. "Thank you for coming," Isabel said, her voice a dry rasp. Clara can be dramatic, she gestured to the chair beside her bed. I'm sure she explained the situation. I want to be clear. This is a business arrangement. A contract. In exchange for your name and your time for a few months, I will establish a trust for you and your daughter that will ensure you never have to worry about money again. The offer was clean, cold, and transactional. He could pay off his debts, buy a small house, give Pippa the future he dreamed of but could never afford. He could say yes, sign the papers, and walk away a rich man. But as he looked at her, he saw more than a business proposition. He saw the deep, hollowed-out grief in her eyes, a reflection of the one he'd carried since his wife, Sarah, had passed away. His gaze fell to her nightstand, to a book with a familiar, worn blue cover. Songs of the Open Road, it was Sarah's favorite book of poetry. A lump formed in his throat. This woman wasn't a contract. She was a person, terrified and alone, trying to protect the last piece of herself. He left the hospital that day without giving an answer, the weight of her offer pressing down on him. The money would change everything. It would mean security, stability, an end to the constant, grinding worry that was the background noise of his life. He could give Pippa everything Sarah would have wanted for her. But as he tucked Pippa into bed that night, her small arms wrapped around his neck, he knew he couldn't do it. He couldn't sell his name, not even for her. It was the one thing he had to give his daughter that was truly his integrity. The next morning, he returned to the hospital. Isabel looked up, surprised to see him. "I've thought about your offer," Owen said, his voice quiet but firm. "And I can't accept it." A flicker of disappointment crossed her face. "I see. I'm sorry to have wasted your time." "You didn't," he continued, taking a step closer. "I'll do it. I'll marry you. But not for money. I have one condition." She raised a skeptical eyebrow. "It can't be a lie. I won't be your employee. I'll be your partner. We will build a friendship. I'll read to you. I'll bring my daughter, and she'll tell you her terrible jokes. We'll share stories. We'll make whatever time you have left feel like a life, not a legal strategy. I will give you my name, but you have to let me give you my friendship, too." Isabel stared at him, utterly speechless. In her world, everything had a price. Every favor had a cost. This quiet, unassuming man had just refused a fortune and, in its place, demanded something far more valuable and terrifying, genuine human connection. And so, their strange, fragile courtship began. Owen kept his promise. He came every afternoon, after his shift at the library. Sometimes he brought Pippa, who, with the unfiltered innocence of a child, was completely unfazed by the beeping machines and the sterile smell of the hospital. She would climb onto the edge of Isabel's bed and present her with a new drawing, a lopsided unicorn, a smiling sun with sunglasses. She'd tell Isabel about her day, about the boy who pulled her pigtail and the gold star she got in spelling. For the first time in months, real, unrestrained laughter echoed in the sterile room. When Pippa wasn't there, Owen would read. He started with Songs of the Open Road, his voice filling the silence with verses about life, loss, and the beauty of the journey. They started to talk. He spoke of Sarah, of their shared love for old books and rainy days, of the crushing emptiness she'd left behind. Isabel, in turn, opened up about her own life. She spoke of her passion for the foundation, the joy of discovering a new artist, the fire she felt when she could give someone a chance they'd been denied. She also spoke of her father, of a lifetime spent trying to earn a single word of approval, only to be met with cold indifference. The hospital room transformed. Pippa's drawings were taped to the walls, a vibrant, chaotic mural of love. A bond, tentative and delicate, was forming between the three of them. It was a family, being built in the most unlikely of places, under the shadow of a ticking clock. Clara would watch from the doorway, a silent observer to this quiet miracle, her heart swelling with a hope she hadn't dared to feel before. The fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of Frederick Blackwood. He swept into the room like a storm front, his tailored suit immaculate, his face a mask of aristocratic fury. His cold eyes landed on Owen, who was sitting by Isabel's bed, a half-eaten container of hospital pudding on the table between them. Frederick's lip curled in a sneer. He took in Owen's simple clothes, his worn-out shoes, his quiet demeanor, and dismissed him instantly. "So, this is him," Blackwood boomed, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is the parasite you found." He turned his venomous gaze on Owen. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over. How much did she pay you?" "A few thousand to ease your pathetic little life." "Name your price." "I'll double it for you to disappear." Owen felt a hot flush of anger, but he held his ground. He met the billionaire's glare without flinching. This was the test. The moment of truth. He could feel Isabel's fear, a palpable wave from the bed. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Blackwood," Owen said, his voice low and steady. yet it cut through the man's blustering rage. Frederick laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Everyone is for sale. Don't insult my intelligence. I will ruin you. I'll have you fired. I'll paint you as a con artist who preys on sick women. I will make your life a living hell. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. This man had the power to do it. He could destroy Owen's simple, carefully constructed world with a single phone call. But Owen didn't waver. He slowly stood up, placing himself between Blackwood and Isabel's bed. He wasn't a fighter, but he would be a shield. Your daughter's life is not a commodity, Owen said, his voice ringing with a moral authority that money could not buy. And neither is my integrity. You can't buy what you don't understand. From the bed, a new voice, stronger than Owen had ever heard it, spoke up. Get out. Isabel was sitting straighter, her eyes blazing with a fire that had long been dormant. Get out of my room, father. Frederick turned, stunned into silence by her defiance. Isabel, don't be a fool. I have been a fool my entire life, she shot back, her voice raw with decades of pain. A fool for thinking I could ever earn your love. This man, this stranger, has shown me more kindness in 2 weeks than you have in 40 years. He is my choice. Now, leave. Defeated and shaking with impotent rage, Frederick Blackwood turned and stormed out of the room. The silence he left behind was profound. Isabel looked at Owen, her eyes filled with tears, but for the first time, they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of liberation. The next day, in the hospital's small, sun-drenched rooftop garden, they were married. A quiet nurse and the hospital chaplain served as official witnesses. But the real witnesses were Pippa and Clara, standing side by side, holding a bouquet of wildflowers in each other's hands. Owen, in a simple dark suit he'd owned for years, slipped a plain silver band onto Isabel's finger. It wasn't a contract. It was a promise. A promise to stand with her, to be her friend, to be her family, until the very end. Life settled into a new, strange rhythm. Owen was now legally Isabel's husband. He split his time between the library, his small apartment, and her hospital room, which now felt more like a home. They were a family, forged in crisis. Then, a week after the wedding, Dr. Evans came into the room, her face holding an expression Isabel had never seen before, stunned optimism. Isabel, we need to talk about your latest scans, she began cautiously. Isabel's heart sank. It was worse. It had to be. Owen instinctively reached out and took her hand. The experimental treatment you started, the doctor continued, her voice gaining excitement, the one we thought was only palliative, we're seeing a response. A significant response. The tumor markers are down by 80%. We're seeing remission. The word hung in the air, foreign and impossible. Remission. It wasn't a word that had been part of her vocabulary. The diagnosis had been a death sentence, the end of the story already written. But now, the doctor was handing her a blank page. A future. A life. The news washed over her, a tidal wave of shock, terror, and overwhelming, disbelieving hope. She looked at Owen, this kind, quiet man who had married a dying woman out of sheer decency. She looked at the silver band on her finger. Suddenly, their arrangement, their beautiful, tragic, finite agreement, was shattered. The end was no longer the end. It was the beginning of a life she was completely unprepared to live, married to a man she was only just beginning to know. The implications were staggering, and for the first time, Isabel felt truly terrified. The news of Isabel's miraculous recovery sent shockwaves through their small, makeshift world. Frederick Blackwood, upon hearing it, was reportedly apoplectic. His final, cruel maneuver had not only failed but had inadvertently cemented the very thing he sought to prevent, Isabel's control over her own life and legacy, now with a future stretching before her. The marriage was legally ironclad. He was powerless. But in the quiet of the hospital room, a different kind of tension grew. The premise of their relationship was gone. The noble, tragic purpose had vanished, replaced by the awkward reality of a life to be lived. Owen, ever practical and honorable, knew what he had to do. One evening, as Isabel was packing a small bag for her eventual discharge, he broached the subject. Isabel, he began, his voice gentle. This is incredible news. It's a miracle, she nodded, her hands stilling over a folded sweater. I know, our agreement was for a specific purpose, he continued, his heart aching with a feeling he couldn't name. To protect the foundation. To give you peace. That purpose has been fulfilled. I want you to know, I'll sign whatever papers you need. An annulment, a divorce, we can make it a clean break. No complications. You deserve a fresh start. He was offering her an escape hatch, an exit from their bizarre contract. It was the right thing to do. The honorable thing. But as he said the words, a profound sadness settled over him. Isabel looked up from her bag, her gaze searching his. She looked at this man who had asked for nothing and given everything. She thought of Pippa's bright drawings on the wall and Clara's newfound laughter. She thought of the quiet evenings spent listening to him read, his voice a comforting anchor in her storm. These people hadn't just saved her legacy, they had saved her. They had become her family. No, she said, her voice soft but certain. I don't want a clean break. She took a hesitant step toward him. What if this is the fresh start? You kept your promise to me, Owen. Now, I want to ask you to make a new one. Stay. Please. Not because of a contract. But because I think this is real. 6 months later, the smell of sizzling bacon and melting butter filled a warm, sunlit kitchen. The sterile white of the hospital was a distant memory, replaced by cheerful yellow walls and the happy clutter of family life. Owen, wearing an apron with a flour smudge on his cheek, flipped a pancake with practiced ease. At the large wooden dining table, Pippa and Clara were huddled over a single piece of paper, engaged in a spirited debate about whether a dragon could, in fact, have rainbow-colored wings. Their bickering was the new background music of his life, a melody of sibling affection he never thought he'd hear. A pair of arms slid around his waist, and he felt a chin rest gently on his shoulder. He leaned back into Isabel's embrace. She looked vibrant, her cheeks full and rosy, her eyes clear and filled with a light he now knew was pure happiness. Her hair had started to grow back, a soft, dark halo. They're going to be late for school, she murmured, her lips brushing his ear. Let them, Owen replied, turning his head to kiss her. Let them have 5 more minutes. They stood there for a long moment, simply watching the girls, their two separate worlds seamlessly merged into one. On the kitchen counter, nestled between a jar of wildflowers and a stack of mail, sat a familiar book with a worn blue cover. The marriage that had started as a desperate, unbelievable plea from a tearful girl in a library had become the truest thing in their lives. It wasn't built on a lie or a contract, but on a foundation of unexpected kindness. It served as a quiet reminder that sometimes, the most profound wealth isn't what you own, but what you're willing to give away. And that the most beautiful families aren't always the ones you were born into, but the ones you are brave enough to build.